Well, Dan, thank you very much for coming to the Homegrown Hunter TV. Appreciate you being here.
Great opportunity.
Folks, Dan is a retired conservation officer in Eastern Ontario. In fact, he was a conservation officer in my hometown here in Tweed, Ontario. And I've invited him out here to talk to us about land ownership, about hunting laws and rules that we're supposed to be following, which I know for a fact, and I think we all do have friends out there that may have to brush up on the rules. So that'd be a great opportunity to have everybody see what Dan has to offer in regards to the knowledge for the Ministry of Natural Resources. Yet because he's retired, he's keeping himself busy with the hunter education course. So we'll touch base on that as well.
Sounds great,
So,
Steve.
first of all, I am a landowner. I own 88 acres, and unfortunately for myself, I bought a property that has two roads that actually coincide on both sides. So two sides of my property are lined with roads. What can I do in order to protect myself from any poaching issues that might pursue this fall?
Yeah, I guess, Steve, just as an introduction, and I will get your question.
Yep.
As you mentioned, I'm recently retired. I retired at the end of 2014. So I always suggest that people, as a start, check the Ontario hunting summary. They can either do that through a hard copy, or they can go online to ontario.ca/hunting and check them online. And failing that, get a hold of their local conservation officer or call the Ministry of Natural Resources. There's a 1-800 number. It's 1-800-667-1940 to talk to somebody to keep current.
Is that the M&R tips?
No, that's not the actual tips number. That's the Ministry of Natural Resources information number.
Okay.
And that way they can get hooked up to an actual officer. The tips number is reserved more for actual complaints or violations.
Yeah.
So they're better off to use that information number. As far as a general point of view, and I don't mind answering from my knowledge, as you had indicated, I'm fairly recently retired, and I still have a good knowledge of that. So dealing with that and the trespassing issues, and specifically to start with from roads, there's a requirement for hunters not to trespass. And there are certain indications. So if an individual does put up no trespassing signs, it's obvious to everybody that means no trespassing. There are people that put up no hunting signs as well, and there is confusion with the use of no hunting signs, because there's people that feel if they put up a no hunting sign, it means that
You're not allowed to hunt it. Yeah,
but all that indicates is somebody other than the landowner or somebody without permission cannot hunt on that property. So no hunting doesn't necessarily mean that there will be no hunting occur on that property. It just means without permission.
Okay.
Other common ways, though, that people can post that property, the posting of a red 4-inch circle or 10 centimeter diameter circle. The shape doesn't have to be circular. It has to cover that area, though. The posting of that also means no trespassing, and that means that people cannot enter.
And you learn that in the hunter education course.
You learn that in the hunter education program. It's also mentioned in the hunting summary that is a common way of marking as well. And that does mean no trespassing. So again, it doesn't mean no hunting, because a landowner can still allow who he wants onto that property.
He's just saying, if you want to hunt my place, you got to come bang on my door and ask.
Yeah. And the other type of circle that occasionally people may come across is a yellow circle, same size. And what yellow means is that there are some prohibited activities. It's not the same weight, not the same strength as a red circle,
Okay.
but it does mean that there are some prohibited activities. And I have seen them occur on some of the Conservation Authority properties and some landowners.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, they're not as commonly used, but if an individual does come across a yellow circle, it's up to them to determine what are prohibited and what are permitted activities as well.
Interesting.
Some other common things that people should be aware of: trespassing can be just straight trespassing under the Trespass to Property Act, but there are trespassing sections under the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act that apply to hunting and fishing. And in a lot of cases, those penalties are more severe because they can include hunting suspensions and prohibitions and loss of hunting equipment as well. Other things that hunters have to be aware of that do indicate no trespassing are things such as fences, agricultural fields under cultivation, things like that.
Just the respect of the
with those properties, the landowner legally does not have to post them. They are deemed to be private property, and it's up to the hunters
Yeah,
to find permission.
you get into the fall and not putting duck and goose hunters down, but they see these plowed fields and they go in there with their mud trucks and they go bombing through the fields. I've seen massive ruts, and farmers don't, guys lose property like that every year because of just stupid acts on their part. I think it's smart as a hunter to obviously respect that owner, and as you're saying, it's a part of the law. They don't have to post it, so you better be smart about going onto that land.
And you mentioned it, Steve. The thing that's really unfortunate about it, I would say by far the vast majority of hunters have respect for private property, have respect for the ethics of hunting, but it's unfortunate that really small percentage of the people that do those activities, as you indicated, and others, they shut it down for all of the legitimate
They
hunters.
just screw it up for everybody.
Because landowners just all of a sudden start tarring all the hunters the same. And in the hunter education program, that's the one section that we talk about. We spend a fair amount of time talking not just about the laws, but the ethics and responsibility of hunters and how that can impact all hunters, not just themselves. It's that whole image thing that's...
Yeah, I'll tell you a personal thing that happened to me about, I'm going to say 8 or 10 years ago. I approached a landowner right on my road. At this time, I didn't own my farm, but I approached the landowner, asked him if I could go bear hunting there. He said, no problem. Well, at that time, because of the corn damage and stuff, I went in and harvested the bear. I gave him a box of turtles at Christmas time, and the following spring, a local neighbor took a quad through one of his fields and wrecked it. Now, that guy didn't hunt, but immediately, because I had the access to his land, he called me up mad as heck because he's got these ruts in his field, and Steve, your quad was in there. You shouldn't. And it was not me. I found out who it was, and made that guy go back and apologize, which mended the wound. But it's bad news for guys to disrespect landowners like that. And if you're going to approach a guy, make sure that you respect him at the time that you're there. Don't wreck his fields. And these farmers work very hard to make their pay, and you don't want to be wrecking it for the rest of us. That small percentage, most of us don't want to be a part of that. So
now, one thing that as an officer when I was working, that we strongly suggested people do, there isn't a legal requirement for written permission except for deer hunting on Manitoulin Island and hunting elk in Ontario. Those are the only two legal requirements for written permission. But we always strongly advocated that people do get written permission for a couple of reasons. And the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, the OFAH, does put out a form that people can get
lot
access
concession and how
That's
many
right.
acres, the ownership of it.
And the nice thing about that, to me, it makes it easier for the landowner because then they have a written record of who actually is on their property. And it makes it easier for the hunter because if all of a sudden there are complaints of trespassing on a piece of property, it's a lot easier for the officer to be able to just look at that document and understand that individual does have permission. Because failing that, then there ends up being time that is essentially wasted trying to track down that landowner and determine whether or not there was permission granted. Makes it easier all around for people to do that. I do understand in some cases landowners are hesitant because they don't want to get into written documents, but it's strongly advocated when people can to get that written permission, and it does make it easier all around. The other thing it does, Steve, is most of the landowners will put a time restraint on it. Because I can remember hearing and seeing times where people would say, well, I got permission on this property 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the
But
landowner
it's changed the ownership
it's
3 or 4
switched 2 or
times.
3 times. That's
Yeah.
right. So at least by having that written document and having a time date or a time stamp on when it expires, it keeps things current that way.
Yeah, and the best time to get those, I mean, I'm going to talk on a personal matter too. I've got my trapping license, and at one point we're going to have Dave Reed come in here and talk about signatures and stuff. He's a local trapper. But with the signatures and stuff for the requirements of the property, I do that in March and April during the shed antler season. You take a shed antler up and you knock on the guy's door and he's looking at you weird. You're not banging on the guy's door Halloween night saying, do you mind if I hunt there Monday morning? So think ahead of the time. And if you go in there that time of year, you're not going to be, I can't say offend the landowner, but you're going to, not catch them off guard either. Like say, oh, well, I don't like hunters in here. I don't want to, go in there in March or April, talk to them, have a coffee with them, get to know the owner, and you'll have a lot better chances of getting on that land when you're not banging on the door with Hunter Orange on.
Well, and it's all about, you've hit it right on the head, Steve. It's all about those relationships. If it's a farmer that you're trying to develop that relationship to get access to his property, if you're going in off season, then you can find out how his operation works. You'll get to know times a year that he has parts that he's actively using for farming that he won't want people on. And you can educate yourself. And if that individual even refuses you, by that self-education, it makes you that much better to go and talk to that next landowner. But you're dead on. You've got to be doing those types of things off season. And I don't know how often I used to see when I was still working opening day, and you'd have an individual out and say, well, I'm looking for permission. Well, I highly doubt that somebody's looking for permission opening day, and that's probably a potential trespass that is just waiting to happen.
Just get in trouble for it.
Yes, so it's all about those relationships and developing them as early as the season and continuing them.
Yeah.
After the hunt, then go back and thank the individual for it, because then that's going to help you with that repeated activity. If you go in once and knock on his door in April, get the form signed, go and hunt all during the deer hunt, and the farmer never sees you again, there isn't a relationship. And think of it, it may not be the same type of relationship as a good friend, but you want to develop some sort of relationship with that landowner if you want to have continued use of that property.
I remember the same guy that gave me trouble for not putting the ruts in the road or on his driveway. I drove by there one day, just coming back from one of my travels, and I spotted him loading up some cherry into his barn. So, I mean, I had some time. I jumped off and I saved him probably 50% of his time, because he was jumping from the top of the barn down to the hay wagon to put the cherry up, and then had to stack it all. So I was going from the hay wagon up, and before you know it, we became friends, and I've been hunting there for 10 years now. So, you know, having access and helping the guy out, you know, giving him a Christmas card, or, you know, buying him a Timmy Hortons, you know, $20 gift card at Christmas time, or a box of chocolates goes a long way.
It sure
You know,
is.
it certainly does. So, on another topic, as far as trespassing stuff goes, or if guys go on to my property, let's say I'm hunting, and this has happened. I'm out in the gun stand, I'm sitting on my blind, and all of a sudden a guy crosses my property. I know it's my land, it's clearly marked. Do I put my gun down and approach him? Do I just take a picture with him with my phone and then send it to the ministry? Do I call tips? Like, what would be the best reaction? Like, I obviously don't want to approach him with a gun.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing, right? Because you never know what'll happen.
Yeah, and sometimes things can get blown out of proportion that way, and especially if conversations get a little bit elevated.
Heated,
you're far better off not to have firearms involved in that. And a lot of those, Steve, end up being on a case-by-case basis. It might be a case that you run into an individual just walking through the bush, and in which case you've already encountered him. When I was still working, and the ministry still tells people, don't try to do the role of a conservation officer. If you can get into that friendly dialogue to get something, that's fine. Fail in that, get whatever evidence you can. If you can get a photograph of the individual, if he does have an ATV or a truck there that you can get a license plate, document that. We always strongly, advocating using the tips line.
Okay.
You can call your local conservation officer. The downside of that, unless you've got a good personal relationship with the officer, there is potential for that officer either to be on days off, or it could be in a different area on a special
situation.
on a special assignment. Whereas if you call the tips line, other than Christmas Day, that tips line is monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week,
Oh, nice.
64 hours a day. And they know who is working, who isn't, either through a radio dispatch or a phone call. They can get a hold of an officer, whether it's your local officer or somebody else, and have them follow through on that. So.